Documenta's archive consists of part which is on fate of killed and missing. There are questionnaires which have been filled in by witnesses and family members. These forms are all signed by the persons who eventually spoken about what happened to their nearest and who are still either disappeared or their bodily remnants have been found, and researcher. In that part of archive are also video records and audio records of personal memories. It is that we cover 20th century, the oldest witness of history being born in 1917. And we have more than 500 interviews. Part of collection is published on platform Croatian Memories. It is very important that it's accessible, and more than 200 interviews are also translated to English, so they're accessible for researchers. Besides that platform, we're now developing Faces of Resistance platform, which is reaching out to other countries, also not just in post-Yugoslav countries, but also globally to countries like Argentina and South Africa. In that part of collection, it's also documentation of human rights organizations. We have anti-war campaign, Croatia archives, and archives of some other civic initiatives going back to the 80s in 20th century. Then the large part of our documentation is related to war crimes trials, both in Croatia and in post-Yugoslav countries, but also to the trials at International Criminal Tribunal for War Crimes in ex-Yugoslavia. And it is that we also have part of archive related to memorialization, as we are research, documentation and advocacy Human Rights Center. A lot of our initiatives are related to memorialization, and this is related to periods of Second World War, political violence during time of socialism, and the wars of 90s, going from 91 in Croatia and 2001 in Macedonia. And then we have also documentation related to advocating RECOM, being proposal for regional. It's rather important role of catalyzer, of initiator, and ideally what we collect would be eventually linked with what public archives and public research institutions produce, which is most clear in case of documenting fate of killed and disappeared, as the part of documentation we have, it's largely connected to our ongoing field research. So our researchers are all the time visiting the places, the villages where massacres have taken place. And what is in possession of State Archive and dedicated state institution, Memorial Documentation Center, it's official documentation. So these two parts of documentation are complementary and should be eventually united to produce the list of killed in the war from 91 to 95 in Homeland War. But will that happen, and when is that going to happen? It's still an open question, as institution like Documenta is often perceived and labeled as organization of traitors. So there are difficulties in communication. I would say that during the years, as we monitor all war crimes trials in Croatia, and the documentation is published on our web, which eventually includes the legal documentation from indictment to the final verdict, plus reports of monitors. Due to that, we permanently have good cooperation with Ministry of Justice. But this is really only ministry and government of Republic Croatia, with which we have permanent communication and cooperation, continue to develop in the future. And it's also that I would like to mention our education programs and professional development programs. It is that We actually organize seminars for history teachers and teachers of civics, but we also have a long-lasting cooperation with Judicial Academy related to professional development of prosecutors, judges, lawyers, and civil society organizations which work on witness support and victim support. And we also have a long-lasting cooperation with Police Academy, also in professional development. So there are possibilities for further development. And at this stage, for many years, we now search for cooperation also on international level to eventually support each other in advocating more developed strategies and policies related to transitional justice and dealing with the past. As Croatia is a member of European Union, we really hope that in not so far future, European Union will extend its current strategy on transitional justice to European countries. It's rather odd that European Union is committed to dealing with the past on other continents. Civil society, especially through documenting and recording stories of survivors from minority groups, ethnical minorities, or eventually any group of minorities, is bringing in the public space the stories which are otherwise normally not part of dominant narration. And in transition countries, frequently there is tradition of imposing very simplified dominant narration, which is in our country related to a majority Croatian group, but in Serbia it's related to majority Serbian group. And I have seen so many countries where dominant narration is simplified and it's imposed on history teachers, it's imposed in media. In Croatia, eventually, there is even parliamentarian declaration on homeland war, which is defining what was war in Croatia all about. And clearly it was a war which was defense war and response to aggression from Serbia, but it was also a war with elements of civil war. And here we come in a field where only civil society actors and media, especially investigative journalists, are speaking about this side, this phase of war. And it is that civil society organizations in cooperation with media play a very important role in showing the stories of people from other sides of armed conflict or neglected stories when we document human rights violations in general and not necessarily violations of humanitarian law. They can learn how to utilize documentation. They can learn how human rights organization can eventually build from scratch and in conditions where the state archive and research institutions linked to universities or linked to archive or official documentation state institutions are not willing to portray and document the multi-layered reality of war or armed conflicts, what is very frequently the case. So there is a space for civil initiatives to work on that. So it's that building documentation center takes energy and time and can be done in many different ways. It's always something what will be specific and should be developed in context of specific country, but there are eventually possibilities for learning and exchange, and this kind of exchange, it's very important for documentation centers and archives which are just starting, both in sense of documenting and in sense of advocating rights of survivors. And finally, I would say as a global community, we are just on the beginning of involving survivors and ensuring participation of survivors in all the processes which matter to dealing with the past and which matter to their lives. So I believe that human rights organizations are ones who might offer an example and open the path, so that survivors are always involved when decisions are taken about their well-being and well-being of societies where they live.